The cold hum of the transport echoed through the hollow halls of the orbital prison. Captain Drake sat in silence, his gaze fixed on the metallic floor, reflecting the stark blue light of the restraints clamped around his wrists. He had once worn a commander's insignia, leading men and women with pride. Now, he was just another prisoner, another failure, banished to the fringes of Earth's forgotten convicts. The door slid open with a hiss, and a guard gestured sharply for him to rise. "They're ready for you," the guard said flatly. Drake stood, his joints stiff from the years of confinement. His thoughts were turbulent. He had heard whispers, rumors of an alien invasion, of desperate measures. But it wasn't until the warden herself appeared in his cell, eyes cold as steel, that the truth became clear. "Captain Drake," she had said, "we need soldiers. You have two choices. Serve Earth one last time, or rot here. Now!" As he entered the briefing chamber, the reality of that choice solidified. In the room, for others waited, bound like him, but with eyes sharp and dangerous. Each bore the mark of someone cast aside but not broken. A hologram flared to life at the center of the room, casting a ghostly blue light over their faces. The image of a besieged colony filled the air. Burning structures, alien forces cutting through the defenders like they were made of paper. "You are Earth's only option," the voice of the unseen commander stated. "Our main forces are engaged on other fronts. This colony holds critical data, intelligence that, if lost, could cripple us in the larger war. You, prisoners, have been selected to defend it." The room was silent except for the faint hum of the hologram. Drake scanned the others. They were far from the disciplined soldiers he was used to commanding. These were killers, hackers, deserters. But then again, so was he. The first to speak was Reyna, a woman with cold eyes and a wry smile. "They're sending us?" she scoffed. "What? Running out of cannon fodder? You've been chosen because you have nothing left to lose," the commander's voice replied. "But for each of you, there's still something to gain." The hologram shifted, showing their prison records, detailing their crimes. Reyna snorted and looked around the room. "You must be Drake," she said. "Ex-commander, court-martialed for defying orders and saving civilians instead of the objective. Guess your hero days are long over." Drake remained silent, meeting her gaze without flinching. Then there was Zed, a hulking man covered in scars. He leaned forward, arms tense with the threat of violence barely restrained. "Sergeant Zed," he grunted. "Heavy weapons expert. They say I like the big guns a little too much. They'd be right." His smile was more a baring of teeth. "But I'll tell you this, Commander. If we're going out there, I'm going to enjoy every second." Beside him sat Ivan, smaller in stature, but with eyes that never stayed in one place for long. His silence spoke volumes. A man who had seen too much and had run from it all. His crime, desertion. The last member of the squad hadn't said a word. She was seated in the corner, arms crossed, a look of deep calculation on her face. Her name tag read Mara, and her record was a blank, an enigma. The commander's voice continued, unfazed by the tension in the room. "Your mission is simple. Hold the colony. Buy us time. In return, your sentences will be reevaluated. Do your jobs well enough, and you may even walk free." Drake spoke for the first time. His voice was low, steady. "What kind of resistance are we expecting?" The hologram zoomed in on the alien forces. Towering, insect-like creatures swarmed across the battlefield. Their movements were fast, fluid, unnatural. Drake's heart sank. These weren't the same enemies he had faced in the past. This was something else entirely. "They're called the Shikari," the commander explained. "Hunters. They're highly efficient, technologically advanced, and they've been tearing through our colonies. But they don't know you. They'll underestimate you. That's your advantage." Reyna smirked. "So we're supposed to win because we're so pathetic that even the aliens won't see us coming." "You're supposed to win because you're skilled," the commander corrected. "Despite everything you've done, despite where you've ended up, each of you is still one of the best Earth has produced." The briefing ended with a final flicker of the hologram. The guards unshackled their restraints, leaving the prisoners rubbing their sore wrists. Drake surveyed his new squad. There was no camaraderie here, only necessity. But necessity would have to do. He could feel the weight of their fates pressing down on him. Whether they lived or died would depend on whether he could unite them in battle. "We leave in 2 hours," Drake said, his voice firm. "Whatever you were before, it doesn't matter now. We're soldiers again, and we're all that stands between them and Earth." Reyna snorted but didn't argue. Zed cracked his knuckles, clearly eager for the fight ahead. Ivan remained silent, his mind somewhere else. Mara still didn't speak, but gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Drake turned away, leading the team out of the room. He knew this would be no simple fight. They were walking into hell, but they would do so as soldiers once more. For now, that was enough. The drop ship shuddered as it tore through the atmosphere, the roar of engines filling the cabin with a deafening hum. Captain Drake sat at the front, helmet in hand, eyes narrowed in focus as the planet loomed large through the viewport. He could feel the tension in the air. His team sat strapped in behind him, each member lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the sky burned orange, the colony below them barely visible through the thick clouds of smoke. Reyna tapped her fingers impatiently on the armrest. "So, how long until we're knee-deep in alien bugs?" "Each 5 minutes," came the voice of the pilot, crackling over the comms. Zed grinned from his seat, his fingers flexing over the trigger of the massive plasma cannon strapped to his chest. 5 minutes, till we show these Shikari what real soldiers look like." "Let's hope they're as unprepared as Command thinks," Ivan muttered, his voice quieter, more introspective. He glanced around nervously. "Otherwise, we're all dead." "No one's dying today," Drake said, his tone sharp and commanding. He looked back at his team, meeting each of their eyes. "Remember why you're here. We hold the line. We protect that data. We get out alive. That's it." Mara, still silent, only nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of the blade she had holstered to her side. She had been distant ever since they'd been briefed. Drake couldn't tell if it was nerves or something else. She was a mystery he hadn't cracked yet, but he could tell she was dangerous in her own right. The ship lurched as it began its final descent. Drake pulled his helmet over his head, the heads-up display flickering to life as the tactical map of the battlefield appeared before him. The colony was spread out below, a scattered maze of buildings, many already in ruins, with fires dotting the horizon. Shikari forces swarmed the outskirts, their insectoid forms moving with unsettling precision. The ship's doors hissed open, revealing the chaotic landscape beyond. "Go, go, go!" Drake shouted, launching himself out of the seat and into the open air. His team followed close behind, their boots hitting the ground with heavy thuds. The moment they touched down, the air was thick with the smell of ash and burning metal. Around them, the Shikari forces swarmed, towering creatures with jagged, armored bodies and glowing red eyes. Their movements were unnervingly fast, like shadows darting across the landscape. "Hold the line," Drake ordered, raising his rifle and firing a burst of energy rounds at the nearest alien. The shot connected, sending the creature crashing to the ground in a twitching heap. Zed was already in the thick of it, his cannon roaring to life as he cut a swath through the alien ranks. His laughter was wild, almost manic, as he reveled in the chaos. Reyna, beside him, moved with deadly precision, her twin pistols spitting plasma with every graceful step she took. She moved like a dancer in battle, lethal and fluid. "Drake!" Ivan shouted from behind a pile of debris, ducking just as a Shikari's claws sliced through the air above him. "We're getting pinned down here." Drake gritted his teeth and fired another round, watching as the alien in front of him crumpled. "Reyna," Zed, "push up. We need to clear this area." Reyna sprinted ahead without hesitation, her pistols blazing, while Zed followed, his cannon blazing hot. The two carved a path forward, leaving a trail of burning wreckage in their wake. Mara stayed close to Ivan, her blade flashing as she cut down any Shikari that got too close. Her movements were calculated, precise, cold, and efficient in a way that made Drake uneasy. There was something off about her, but he couldn't focus on that now. The team fought their way toward the center of the colony, moving from cover to cover, cutting down waves of aliens as they advanced. The sky above them darkened as more Shikari ships descended from the clouds, disgorging reinforcements. It seemed like there was no end to them. "We're getting overrun," Ivan shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. "There's too many. Hold your ground," Drake bellowed. He ducked behind a piece of wreckage, checking his HUD. They were close to the data vault now. The mission objective just within reach. If they could just hold on a little longer. Suddenly, there was a piercing screech, louder than anything they'd heard before. Drake looked up just in time to see a massive Shikari, larger than any of the others, emerge from the smoke. Its eyes glowed a brilliant crimson, and its mandibles clicked with a chilling hunger. It was heading straight for them. "Fall back," Drake ordered, pulling Reyna and Ivan with him as the creature charged. Zed stood his ground, his cannon firing relentlessly, but it was barely making a dent in the creature's thick armor. Mara, for the first time, seemed unsure of herself, hesitating as the beast approached. Drake's mind raced. They were outmatched, outnumbered, and if they didn't regroup soon, they'd be wiped out. "Zed, focus on its legs," Drake shouted, grabbing his grenade launcher. He aimed for the creature's legs, firing off 2 grenades in quick succession. The explosions rocked the ground and the creature faltered, its massive form stumbling. "Now, everyone, hit it with everything you've got," Drake yelled. The team rallied, unleashing their full firepower on the staggering beast. Plasma rounds, grenades, and rockets filled the air in a blinding assault. The massive Shikari screeched in agony before finally collapsing into the rubble, its body twitching one last time before going still. Panting, Drake looked around at his team. They were battered, bloodied, but still standing. The battle wasn't over, but they had won this round. Drake took a deep breath, steadying himself. "We're almost there. Let's move." The team advanced cautiously, every step weighed with the tension of what was to come. They were survivors, but the real challenge still lay ahead. The air in the data vault was thick with tension, punctuated only by the low hum of machinery and the distant echoes of battle outside. The team had finally made it, bruised, battered, and running low on ammunition, but alive. The room was a stark contrast to the war-torn colony above. Sleek metallic walls, glowing consoles, and rows of data servers that hummed with life. In the center, a large cylindrical pod housed the information they had come to retrieve. Drake wiped the sweat from his brow, breathing heavily. "Ivan, start the download. Reyna, Zed, watch the doors. Mara, keep an eye on R6. We're not out of this yet." Ivan quickly rushed to the terminal, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he initiated the data transfer. The screen lit up with lines of code, numbers rapidly cycling as the system decrypted the files they needed. It was a race against time. The Shikari would surely realize what they were doing, and more reinforcements would be on the way. Zed stood at the entrance, his massive plasma cannon raised, eyes scanning the hallway beyond. His usual cocky grin was gone, replaced with a grim focus. "Captain, I don't like this. Feels too quiet." Reyna, standing beside him, nodded in agreement. "They're planning something. We need to move fast." Drake's jaw clenched as he surveyed the room, his mind racing. Every instinct told him they were walking into a trap, but they had no choice. If they didn't get this data out, the entire colony, perhaps the entire planet, would be lost. The Shikari were relentless, and they had made it clear that humanity's time was up. This data, these files, were their last hope. Mara stood at the rear of the room, her back to the others. Her hand rested on the hilt of her blade, eyes fixed on the door that led to the escape route. Something was different about her now. Her earlier hesitation had been replaced with a cold resolve, a certainty that unsettled Drake. He watched her from the corner of his eye, trying to make sense of the sudden shift. "Mara," he said quietly, stepping closer. You okay? She didn't respond at first, her fingers tracing the edge of her blade. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and distant. I've seen what they do to the ones they capture. I won't let that happen. Not to me. Not to any of us. Drake frowned, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. No one's getting left behind. We finish the mission, and we all make it out. Mara's lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing more. Her eyes flicked back to the door, her grip tightening on her weapon. Suddenly, the room was plunged into darkness. The hum of the machine stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Drake's heart skipped a beat as the lights flickered back on, but something had changed. The consoles were dark, and Ivan cursed under his breath. The transfer's been interrupted, Ivan said, frantically typing at the keyboard. I can't wait. Something's wrong. The system's been hacked. Before Drake could respond, the walls began to shake, a low rumble growing louder with each passing second. Zed turned toward the hallway, his cannon at the ready. Captain, we've got company. Through the smoke and debris, a new wave of Shikari stormed the entrance. These were larger than the ones they had faced before, their armored bodies gleaming with an unnatural sheen. Their eyes burned with that same crimson glow, but now there was an intelligence behind them, a cruel, calculating malice. They've sent their elites, Reyna whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing din. She raised her pistols, her gaze steady. Drake gritted his teeth and raised his rifle. Hold the line. We just need a few more minutes. The battle erupted in a flash of light and sound. Plasma rounds ricocheted off the walls, filling the air with the smell of burning metal. Zed roared as he unleashed a torrent of firepower, cutting down the first wave of elites with brutal efficiency. But the Shikari kept coming, undeterred by their losses. They were faster, stronger, and more coordinated than any they had faced before. Ivan shouted from the terminal, his voice strained. I've got it. The data's transferring again, but it's going to take another 5 minutes. Make it 3, Drake barked, firing another round into the oncoming swarm. We won't last 5. The Shikari pressed closer, their numbers overwhelming. Reyna moved like a shadow, darting between the creatures with deadly precision, her pistols firing in rapid succession. But even she was being pushed to her limit, her movements slowing as exhaustion began to take its toll. Drake fired his last round, then dropped his rifle and drew his sidearm. His arms ached, his muscles burning from the endless fighting. But he couldn't stop, none of them could. They were humanity's last stand, and failure wasn't an option. A deafening screech echoed through the room, and Drake turned just in time to see one of the elites charging toward Ivan. Time seemed to slow as the creature lunged, its claws outstretched and its eyes blazing with hatred. There was no way Ivan could dodge in time. But before the creature could strike, Mara was there. She moved with impossible speed, her blade flashing through the air in a deadly arc. The Shikari screeched as the blade sliced through its armor, its body collapsing to the ground in a heap. Mara stood over the fallen creature, her chest heaving with exertion. She turned to Drake, her eyes fierce. We're not losing anyone today. Drake nodded, his respect for her growing. Good work. Now let's finish this. The data transfer completed with a beep, and Ivan pulled the drive from the terminal, holding it up triumphantly. Got it. Fall back, Drake ordered. Everyone to the escape route now. The team moved as one, retreating toward the door as the Shikari closed in. They fired their weapons in controlled bursts, keeping the aliens at bay just long enough to reach the exit. As they breached the door and sealed it behind them, Drake allowed himself a brief moment of relief. They had the data. They were still alive. But as the rumble of approaching Shikari echoed through the walls, he knew their fight was far from over.